Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Easily my most anticipated game of this year, maybe of all time. It's no lie that I am a massive Uncharted fan. It's probably my favorite video game series of all time. I've been waiting for this game, like all of you, since it was first announced, so I would like to talk about it and hopefully give my reasons why I think Uncharted 4 was incredibly underwhelming and disappointing, and why I personally think it's the worst game in the series. Before I start though, this video will obviously contain spoilers for Uncharted 4 and the previous 3 games, so go and play them and then come back. Seriously, go and play them, they are all great games that stand on their own. I also highly recommend you play them before Uncharted 4 if you have not done so, as it added a lot to the experience for me. But that said, you really shouldn't have to play all 3 games, but if you want to play them, then definitely try them out. I, of course, want to say that this is my own opinion. If you liked the game or thought it was a masterpiece, that's totally fine. I don't agree with you, but it is fine nonetheless. This video will probably be quite long as I want to go in depth with this game and try and come up with some kind of conclusion that will leave me satisfied with the overall experience. I've added some time frames, if you will, in the description for you to check out at any given time if I am boring you or repeating myself, or if you want to skip to a certain part, as I'll be breaking this video up into a few chapters. Also, make sure to tell me any complaints or constructive criticism in the comments, as I want to get better at these obviously, and also don't hold back on any questions of any kind. If you have something to say or disagree with me in any way, please comment below and I will try and explain my reasons better. This is the first review I've ever made, so I will try and do my best job of getting my points across while discussing things I liked and things I disliked. The first 2 to 3 chapters are mainly the review, and after that is just some rambling and ranting about certain things surrounding Naughty Dog and Uncharted as a whole. So if you want to stop watching after chapter 3, or if you just want to skip to the end, that's totally fine, but I recommend you hear me out. So I hope you enjoy the video, and let's get started with chapter 1. The game takes place a few years after Uncharted 3 and sees Nate and Elena married, living a seemingly normal and happy life, when all of a sudden, Nate's thought to be dead brother Sam shows up and asks Nate for his help in order to find Henry Avery's lost pirate treasure, which they have been searching for since they were young, but also to help him save his life, which is being threatened by drug lord Hector Alcazar, who wants half of the treasure for himself. Nate reluctantly accepts and our story starts. This is essentially all you need to know about the story. It's similar to the other Uncharted stories, searching after something or someone of significance, action set pieces, lots of cinematics, maybe too many at times, and a sense of adventure, I suppose. Let's talk about Sam. He is a new addition to the series, and I didn't really care for him that much. I didn't really hate him, but I also didn't love him, especially since he's around the whole time. No really, he's in all the chapters besides maybe 4 of them in a 24 chapter game. Jeez. One thing I can say though is that Sam and Nate's relationship felt real, and it definitely got to me at some points. It at times feels a bit too much like Sam's story and less Nate's. After a certain point, Nate just doesn't seem all that interested. It makes you feel like he would be better off playing as Sam, which I don't want. Nate just doesn't always feel like Nate in this game, which is a shame because in a way it seems like they were trying so hard to flesh out Sam that they just kind of forgot about Nate. This is why I feel Sam is more the main character in the story. Skipping further into the game where the betrayal by Sam occurs.
His freedom.
Nathan. Yeah, he did hard time, our time, and the guy who broke him out, Hector Alcazar, he owes him a lot of money.
Whoa, what the hell are you talking about, Nate? Hector Alcazar died in a shootout in Argentina like 6 months ago. I'm the one that got Samuel out.
It wasn't exactly predictable, but I didn't feel like Sam was trustworthy, and I felt like he was lying about something. It made me feel a bit underwhelmed. That's a word you'll hear me using a lot. Also, I already said I wasn't a big fan of Sam, so how is him lying to Nate supposed to make me feel? Nate falls off a cliff and gets separated from Sam and has to go after him, and it made no sense why we were going after Sam. I didn't want to go after him, I was pissed at him. And of course, once we actually catch up to him, nothing happened. No fight or argument or consequences for Sam's actions. Nate just lets it go completely and pretty much forgets about it. Sam is definitely not one of my favorite characters, and I don't think he's really that memorable either. My main problems with Sam is how he's written. It seems lazy. He just feels forced and unnecessary, and he acts like a plot device to get Nate to go back to the treasure hunting so we can actually have an Uncharted 4. Once I noticed that, it really annoyed me. Honestly though, I don't hate Sam, but I don't like him at all.
How long we been chasing this thing, huh? You and me. No offense to these guys, but they don't get it.
The villains of Uncharted 4 were something that I was eagerly anticipating, and one of the reasons I was excited for this game, apart from it being Uncharted 4. Specifically Rafe though. He looked like a completely different villain from what we've already seen in the previous games, and he was kind of terrible in my opinion. He did have enough screen time to make me hate him and understand his reasons for wanting to find Avery's treasure when I was supposed to, because it only happens once, at the end of the game. And by that point it was too late and I really didn't care.
I have sacrificed everything to find Avery.
There is one thing that really pissed me off though, and it's this.
Look, Nate, I'm gonna make you a one-time offer. Drop everything. Go home. Live your life. or we can just end it right here.
I hate that they made it seem like he was saying that to Nate when he was actually saying it to Nadine. Why would you put that in the trailer if it wasn't even what happened? The conversation does happen in chapter 11, but was completely out of nowhere and didn't really have any impact. This was also one of the reasons I was excited about Rafe. Rafe was a disappointing villain and is definitely not one of my favorites. Although saying that, the Uncharted games have never had great villains in my opinion. I'd say the best is probably Lazarevich, but even he is annoying at times.
Who would you sacrifice, and who would you save? What, this one? You want to save this one? Or maybe this one?
You know what? Enough of this shit. All right, quit the theatrics.
Like, come on, just kill him already. The other villain was Nadine Ross, who I really liked. She was way more interesting for me than Rafe, and I wouldn't have minded if she was the main villain, especially considering her character didn't actually do much. I really hope that Nadine's story isn't over and we get more information about her character, but I doubt it, to be honest. The performances by Warren Cole and Laura Bailey were both great. Most of the performances were great, as usual. Also, Nadine is the only villain in the 4 Uncharted games, I haven't played Golden Abyss just yet, that makes it out alive, so that deserves some praise. One of my main problems with Rafe is that people seem to think he's a great villain, and the only reason I really see is because he's cool. There's probably a lot of other reasons, but it seems like that's what people are saying about him. Being cool doesn't equal being a good villain. A villain is supposed to challenge the hero mentally or physically, or both, and all he really did was stand around and yell at people for no reason. He was irrational, quick to anger, and paranoid for most of the game. Nadine, on the other hand, she actually did stuff. She challenged Nate physically and kicked his ass several times. We've never really seen anything like that in Uncharted before. She was in charge of Shoreline and was probably the main reason that Rafe was actually making progress in finding Avery's treasure. I'm not saying Nadine is a great villain, because she isn't, but I really liked her and I thought she was a much better villain than Rafe. It's fine if you like Rafe, of course, but if you're going to say he's a great villain, then back it up. Don't just say he's cool or something, actually come up with a reason why he's an interesting or well-developed character. Again, I'm not saying Nadine is really either of those things, but she was at least more relatable than Rafe. In literally the first scene that Nadine is in, we immediately learn that she's witty, charming, and has a good sense of humor. We also learn that there is some history between Nadine and Sully, and that something happened between them, yet she doesn't hold a grudge.
Wait, doesn't she own that army for hire? It's called Coastline?
Shoreline.
Yeah, right. But you had a run-in with them.
It's putting it mildly. Fortunately, she does not seem to be holding a grudge.
And in the exact same scene, Rafe comes in and starts yelling at Sully for really no reason at all.
Nadine, I think your partner here has had too many Bloody Marys.
Cut the bullshit, old man. I don't know how you scammed your way in here, but if you think about bidding on Avery's cross, I can tell you exactly how you're going to be leaving in a goddamn
Rafe.
fight.
There are many more reasons why I think Nadine is a better villain than Rafe, but I don't want to go in depth with this. And while talking about Rafe, why the hell was he wasting his time with Shoreline? The guy is rich, right? So why is he wasting his time with an army that has a bad reputation and is known for not being very good at what they do? He's been searching for this treasure for most of his life, so why hire a shitty army to do the job for you? Plus, if he's so ashamed by having money and always being looked at as someone who never earned anything, then why is he using his money at all? That makes literally no sense, and it makes Rafe seem like he's not all that serious about finding the treasure, to be honest. It makes him seem kind of stupid as well.
Don't hand it to me. I've had everything handed to me on a goddamn silver platter.
I mean, look at Lazarevich. He had like 2 helicopters, a tank, and a goddamn train. Admittedly a bit overkill, but it was at least obvious that he was serious about finding the Chintamani stone. This also makes Nadine a weird character. While I still like her, she can easily be summed up as a black female Lazarevich with a shittier army. Again, it makes no sense, and I didn't even notice this. My friend Ben was the one who noticed it, and I was like, yeah, that's actually a great point. But moving on. Talking about the story, the game takes its time, maybe too much time, to set up the world that Nate is now living in. We started with a pretty good prologue, which is definitely not better than the prologue to The Last of Us. Although saying that, they're both good and are very different, so no point in really comparing the two. And nowhere near as good as Uncharted 2's incredible start, not surprising.
That's my blood. That's my blood. It's a lot of my blood.
We're then sent back in time to, oh look, it's young Nate, again. These parts of the game were okay, but I really didn't feel the need for them. We do kind of learn a little more about Nate, but it's all stuff that just doesn't seem important. After the first chapter, we are sent into the future before Drake's Fortune. Nate, Sam, and Rafe are all in a prison in Panama. I like this reference to the first chapter of Drake's Fortune.
Yeah, so unless you want to end up in a Panamanian jail, we should probably handle this ourselves.
Well, what's worse?
You obviously haven't been in a Panamanian jail.
Anyway, they're in the prison on purpose trying to find clues for Henry Avery's pirate treasure, and they end up finding a St. Dismas cross, which pretty much tells them they need to go to Scotland. Also, this scene in the laundry room is exactly the same as this scene in Uncharted 2.
Guys, let's just pretend I skipped all of Sunday school.
Okay, during the crucifixion, Jesus is placed between 2 thieves, okay? One of them mocked Jesus. The other one, this guy, was penitent. Okay? He accepted his punishment with grace.
And Jesus brought him to paradise.
Someone want to fill me in?
Marco Polo leaves China. with 600 passengers and 14 ships, loaded down with treasure from Kublai Khan. Now he lands in Persia a year and a half later, with only one ship left and only 18 passengers. Now he recorded every detail of his journey, but he never told what happened to all those ships and the passengers.
And the game plays out pretty much the same way too. You're working with the bad guy who you think is the good guy, Flynn and Rafe, and the other person, Chloe and Sam, are actually working with the bad guy. You then have to save Chloe, and in this game, Sam. Real original script there, guys. Anyway, I'll skip ahead to the part where they escape. Pretty much what happens is Nate and Rafe get out and Sam is left for dead. This part is very long and feels dragged out to make the introduction to the game longer. Not that I didn't like the chapter, which I did, it was just maybe a bit too long. The game cuts to present day and still takes a very long time to get going. Not that these parts were bad, they were honestly some of my favourite moments in the whole game. It just went on for too long. I want to quickly talk about the pacing in the game. I thought the pacing was pretty bad. I can kinda see why people always say Uncharted 3's pacing is terrible because it switches too many locations, but it's never bothered me and it doesn't even do it that much. Also, switching too many locations isn't called bad pacing, it's called switching too many locations. It doesn't really have anything to do with pacing. I could be wrong, but to me, pacing is just another word for boring or slow. From chapter 12 onwards, you're experiencing it all for yourself, for the most part. I don't care what anyone says, to me, Uncharted 3 is a very good game, and I feel like it's a much better Uncharted game than Uncharted 4. Uncharted 3 is by no means a perfect game. It's not even really a great game, but I'm able to look past the faults in the game for a lot of reasons. For example, it's the first Uncharted game I ever played, and it introduced me to the series and the characters. The main reason though is that the team behind Uncharted 3 was a lot smaller than Uncharted 2 due to a lot of them working on The Last of Us. The fact that they managed to get the game out in the same time as Uncharted 2 with half the team is impressive, and I respect the effort that went into it. I'll leave a review in the description that I recommend you check out if you disliked Uncharted 3, as it cleared up a lot of things and made me forgive the game's shortcomings. One other thing I want to talk about is, with Uncharted 4, the game is constantly building to something. This is, to me, shown off in the pacing and how it's a lot slower than the previous 3 games. I personally don't mind slow pacing as long as it builds to something worthwhile, and in Uncharted 4, it didn't. By the end of the game, I was just underwhelmed. And to go back a bit to what I mentioned earlier about Sam's betrayal, it just makes no sense. Finding out what happened and why Sam lied just wasn't a good payoff, and I don't understand why Sam felt the need to lie about it. The game tries to clear this up later, and so we learn it's most likely because Sam wanted to get everything he had on Avery before ditching Rafe. But in a way, he still helped Rafe, and he's part of the reason Rafe actually finds the treasure because he helped him track down all the clues. So he betrayed Rafe and Nate for no reason. If anything, Sam is portrayed as the bad guy in this moment, as he screwed over both Rafe and Nate, which was unnecessary. Plus, just because it's Uncharted doesn't mean there always has to be some sort of twist. And to just quickly quote my friend Ben on something, it would have been better if later down the line, Sully had just found out that Alcazar was dead, and then told Nate in secret that he was dead and that Sam was lying. Nate and Sully would go to confront Sam when Rafe could come in, and Sam would join Rafe as a proper villain, and then the rest of the game would be Nate, Sully, and Elena. Now, to me, that sounds really good. I'm not sure where that would all take place, but it would have been interesting to see. But anyway, after a little while, Sam comes back, and the story does get going, but not before another flashback showing how Sam got out of that same prison. I hate to say it, but this part could have easily just been a long cutscene or something. Why do we have to play as Sam? Plus, besides the tutorial and the prologue, this is the first actual gunfight in the whole game, and we're not even playing as the main character. After chapter 5, they go to Italy, and there's a heist in chapter 6 and 7 to get another St. Dismas cross, which reminds me of the heist in Uncharted 2, and like I said before, the game plays out in similar fashion. There's a heist in chapter 2, and then they go to Borneo. There's a heist in chapter 6 and 7, and then they go to Scotland. Shortly after being in Borneo and Scotland and learning that they need to go someplace else, they leave and go to Nepal and Madagascar, where they spend a lot of the game. And while in Nepal and Madagascar, there's the staple set piece, Uncharted 2's train and Uncharted 4's convoy. Plus, with the train and the convoy, both times Nate was trying to save someone, Chloe and then Sam. But anyway, let's get back on track. The cross ends up leading them to Scotland, even though they already knew to go there, and where they were supposed to go, so why do they even need this cross? They're essentially resuming where they left off 15 years ago for no reason. We could easily just skip this part and go straight to Scotland, right? Unless I'm missing something here. Anyway, we get to see Rafe again, and we meet Nadine for the first time as well. This is also the first time we get to see Sully in the game, which makes everyone's life a little better.
Sully?
Know what I love about partying with a bunch of crooks?
What's that?
Nobody cares if you smoke indoors.
It's been a while.
Too long, boyo.
The chapters were pretty fun, but weren't all that memorable. The most memorable part was the fight with Nadine, but that's just because it was funny watching Nate get his ass kicked by Nadine. For me, it really starts to pick up around chapter 11. I didn't really mind chapters 8 and 9, but I feel like it's just because those parts were in Scotland and I really liked the setting. We spend chapter 10 driving around Madagascar, and it's okay, I guess. Like I said, chapter 11 is where it starts to pick up. There's a great cutscene or cinematic at the end of chapter 11 with Elena. In my opinion, Elena is absolutely right and completely calls Nate out on his bullshit. But right after they argue, Elena leaves and Nate doesn't do anything. Sully even says to Nate to go after her and he just yells at him and acts like a dick for no reason. Are we supposed to see Nate's side to the story? He wants to protect his brother. Okay, sure. Why is he acting like an asshole then? Why does he have to take it upon himself to do everything? Elena would have definitely helped him if he had just told her that. There's another great moment in chapter 13 where Nate and Sam have an argument about what they're doing on the island. But Nate pretty much says what he always says and they just continue on like nothing happened. And what I mean is in every Uncharted game there's a moment where Nate decides it's too much or it's too dangerous and someone, in this case Sam, has to push them to keep going. And it never really felt like that big a deal in this game, to be perfectly honest. They both make a lot of good points, but I felt like Sam was actually right at this moment. Their argument is broken up by Nate spotting Avery's sigil on a wall, and a few minutes later we see Libertalia for the first time. And I wasn't a very big fan of Libertalia. It was definitely very pretty and nicely designed, but I just didn't care for it much. There are a few interesting parts in the story around chapter 14 and 15 though. I'd say this is where the actual Henry Avery story is at its strongest and most interesting. That and chapter 18 when all the pirates are around the table. I actually found that part really enjoyable.
These are some of history's greatest pirates, and they all perished in an instant at this very table.
It's incredible.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
After chapter 15, the story really starts to drag. We get yet another flashback to young Nate and Sam, which I honestly didn't hate. I much prefer the flashback in Uncharted 3 of course, but it kinda makes sense to do it here, especially considering there was a big argument between Nate and Sam. It did feel like it was just there to make you not hate him as much though. It also just feels like it's there to explain why they changed their name to Drake. The reveal was underwhelming, and that's the point, but I was left thinking I really didn't need to know the whole story as to why they changed their name. Some things are best left alone, and this definitely rings true for this chapter. The reason for them doing it is also underwhelming, and doesn't feel like as big of a reveal as it should. It seemed like it was supposed to be an emotional scene, but it didn't really hit the level of emotional impact that it was trying to. I can say that about the whole game, to be perfectly honest. After chapter 16, the game again slows down, or to me just gets boring, which is a shame because I loved being there with Nate and Elena. I just didn't love what we were doing there. It felt like the story switched directions until chapter 21 and became more about saving Sam and less about Avery's treasure, which I was kind of interested in. Everything else leading up to that just felt boring. I love Elena, but I feel like this chapter might have been more impactful if it was just Nate by himself. It would have given him some time to reflect on the decisions he's made so far, and by the time he's figured things out, Elena could come in. This also would have worked in chapter 13 as he was actually alone for the first half of that chapter, but back on topic. The gunfights in these few chapters felt way too over the top and not really fun. Most of the gunfights are similar to this. Take chapter 20, No Escape for example. I hated this chapter. Like what even was chapter 20? Just gunfight after gunfight after gunfight. It was so tedious. The story just kind of pauses so we can have this weird chapter of non-stop gunfights, and it got old very quickly. Let's talk about the last chapter of the game though, titled A Thief's End, which is an okay title. It makes sense for the chapter and makes it a bit clearer that the subtitle A Thief's End is actually referring to Nate, or that's at least how I looked at it. The boss battle in this chapter was kind of lame. It's repetitive and all you're doing is mashing some buttons, much like Uncharted 3's boss battle, which is actually pretty cool. It does get repetitive of course, but it was pretty epic just having a fist fight with all the destruction around them. Anyway, it's easy to get immersed in the fight, but once you think back on it and realize you're just pressing the same few buttons over and over, it fell flat for me. The level is also poorly designed, as most of the time you can't even tell which side Rafe is attacking from, and because it's in this small room, you often get pushed up against the wall and you can't even see then. It felt a little underwhelming when Rafe died. I feel like it would have had a much bigger impact if Nate actually killed him himself. I know that's the point, he's not supposed to kill him, but who has Nate ever actually killed out of the antagonists? To my memory, just Talbot and Navarro, I think. And he didn't even really kill Navarro.
Adios, asshole.
It would have made sense since I had a lot of history. Plus, he's constantly mowing down hundreds of people in this game, and admittedly the previous games as well. He's just murdering these guys who haven't really done anything to him, or have anything against him personally. They're just doing their job. Yet for some reason, Nate decides not to murder the person who threatened to kill everyone that matters to him, and Rafe just dies by some shit falling on him. That would have been fine, but why couldn't Nate have stabbed Rafe in the stomach or something? Maybe that's too dark, but it would have probably fit the tone of this chapter. I will admit though, the music fits very well with this chapter, and is probably the best song on the soundtrack. But it also, like the chapter, is repetitive, and it's essentially a retread of A Thief's End, which I refuse to call Nate's Theme 4.0. Let's finally talk about the ending. It ends in the most boring and underwhelming way possible. Nate and Elena buy the salvage yard place where Nate was working, and they decide to keep treasure hunting, so long as it's legal, which is ridiculous and makes this game feel so pointless. You couldn't have just done that in the first place. Also, it wasn't part of their enjoyment the adrenaline rush they would get by just barely surviving time and time again. Anyway, Nate and Elena end up living the next few years of their lives treasure hunting, and they become famous, I guess, or something. But it's not over yet. Nope, there's an epilogue, which was absolutely necessary. Talking about the epilogue though, I don't hate it and I don't hate Cassie. It's not necessary in the slightest, and it's obvious they're leaving it open for another developer to inevitably make another Uncharted game starring Cassie. I just hope that doesn't happen, but it most likely will. I don't really have any problem with the epilogue though. It's pretty obvious they would have had a kid or two by this point, so it wasn't really surprising to me. We get to play as Cassie and we realize that Nate and Elena are on an island somewhere and they live right at the beach. Cassie explores around the beach looking for Nate and Elena and goes inside the other house, but no one's there. She finds some keys and opens a cupboard with it to find all of Nate's stuff from the previous games. Also, in this one picture alone, there are so many things that are inconsistent with Drake's fortune. For example, Nate has the wrong holster, he's not wearing his watch, and he's wearing leather boots. He's also holding a Moss 12 for some reason, even though he didn't have a weapon at this point due to him losing the SAS 12. If anything, he should have been holding an M4. I know that Sully had a SAS 12 at the end of the game, but Nate doesn't even have that weapon. He's holding a completely different weapon. How could they mess up so many things in just one stupid picture? They made the first game, how the hell did they miss this? Also, Nate says they found a map that led them to the Amazon jungle, or something like that. Which is technically true, but that's not even where Nate and Elena went. That's where Nate and Sully went. I know Elena was there, but still. Nate and Elena went to an island that was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and that's where the whole game takes place, so it might have been worth mentioning that. Although the dialogue gets cut off, so he probably did mention that. Elena then goes back and puts the picture beside that one of Nate and Sam, and the game cuts to black, and the credits roll with the shitty A Thief's End song playing. Overall, the story was probably the worst in the series. It had some interesting moments for sure, but I was never as immersed in it as I wanted to be. I was actually really disappointed when I didn't cry at the end. But anyways, moving on. One of the best ways to decide if a game is good or bad is gameplay. And I'm happy to say that the gameplay mechanics are pretty great. Although I see people saying stuff like the climbing is being refined and improved, or the gunplay is much better. And while these aren't false, what did you honestly expect? Did you really think that things like gameplay wouldn't be improved? In a game? How is this worth praising? These are the types of things in games that happen naturally. I don't see the point of making a big deal out of it when it only makes sense that they would be much better than the last game. I mean, why do you think the game took so long to actually come out? Call it nitpicking if you want, that's just how I see it. Another thing is, of course, the graphics. And yes, they look incredible. This would probably be a straight 10 if we were just talking about the graphics. But that's another thing that people are praising constantly. And again, did you really think the graphics weren't going to be way better than Uncharted 3? Or The Last of Us? I mean, come on, it's on a different console for God's sake. Yes, it's nice to take note of it, but graphics don't make or break a game. To me at least. I'm not saying graphics and gameplay and animations and whatever shouldn't be praised. They should. It's just not a good reason to defend or justify something that's unrelated to a criticism that I may have in the game. Yeah, the graphics are incredible and the gameplay is very good, but it's not very surprising that arguably the two biggest parts of a game would be as good as they could possibly be. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect and appreciation for Naughty Dog. They've obviously worked very hard on every little detail in the game, and that does deserve to be praised. But like I said, good graphics and attention to detail don't make any difference to me personally. It's not like I'm going to notice the smallest details anyway. Same with how this game is locked at 30 frames per second. I don't care at all. I was going to play the game regardless of the frame rate, and it isn't one of my complaints with the game. Games in general should obviously try and be 60 frames per second, but when it's a game I'm excited for, I honestly couldn't care less. The gunplay mechanics are definitely good, but the gunfights themselves are really stale, repetitive, and uninteresting. It also isn't very satisfying landing a headshot or getting through a difficult section. Usually I was just glad it was over. For example, the encounter at Avery's tower in chapter 10 is easily one of my least favorite gunfights in the whole game. The story literally pauses so we can have a lame gunfight, and then the story resumes like nothing happened. Was that really necessary? With the gunplay, it got to the point where I was purposely stealthing around so I didn't have to cut to the chase for maybe the 15th time as soon as I got spotted. And while we're talking about it, stealth. Stealth is definitely something Uncharted needs. It's fine to give people the option, of course, but when the stealth system is just as bare bones as in the previous 3 games, what is the point? If you're gonna do it, commit to it. Add some bottles or sticks or something to be thrown to distract enemies, or something, or some way to lure enemies towards you. Besides hiding in grass, there is almost no variety in the stealth system. As far as I'm concerned, most people will just play Uncharted to play a generic action blockbuster. And while I hate when people call it just a generic action blockbuster, because as a fan of the series, I know it's so much more than that, the argument definitely has some points. Added to the stealth, there is a new, much worse melee system. In Uncharted 2 and 3, and well, I suppose Drake's Fortune as well, the melee was never a big part. You could do it for sure, but it seemed more focused on the gunplay. In those games it was at least fun to do and wasn't always tedious. In this game, you're mashing square to melee, which is fine by itself. The melee animations are very quick and smooth. I just hate how you're mashing triangle whenever you get grabbed by an enemy. I know the previous 3 games' take on melee wasn't exactly original, but it was at least a reasonable option if you had to do it. I never really wanted to do melee in Uncharted 4 because it's still repetitive and kinda unsatisfying, like the stealth. The AI has been greatly improved since The Last of Us, which isn't exactly hard, as the AI in that game was admittedly quite terrible.
This is a fun little moment with the scissor bomb. They had the same animation.
I really didn't like how the enemies you encounter look the same, sound the same, and are pretty much the same though. There's no variety like in the previous 3 games. Although I do like how the enemies actually interact with one another. In the previous games, they literally just stood around waiting for you to kill them. In this game, they actually talk to one another and have conversations. It didn't make me feel bad for killing them, but it was a nice touch.
Are you trying to give away our position? I'm just trying to infuse some culture here. Keep your culture to yourself, please. Philistine. A lot of you.
It really didn't feel like there was much of a sense of danger or really any concern when running out of ammo, because there's always another weapon around somewhere. In Drake's Fortune, your ammo was usually scarce, and it added to the incredible atmosphere of the game. Same with the other 2. In Uncharted 4, there are weapons almost everywhere, and no supernatural elements. In an Uncharted game, that is just absolutely insane to me. Plus, supernatural elements would have been great in this game, some kind of pirate ghost or something. Okay, that's kinda lame, but it's not my job to come up with interesting twists for the story. The game is also a lot more open, which is definitely something I liked. The replay value is pretty low for this game, so it definitely helps having more open environments and more paths for you to choose. You do, of course, end up at the same place every time, but it adds some much needed variety. Chapter 10, for example, was actually kind of fun, just driving all over the place. It felt like it could go on for hours if you tried to explore every part, and it's probably the best example of the open environments. That and Chapter 12, which I also enjoyed. In fact, on my first playthrough, Chapter 12 was my favorite chapter, which kinda says a lot. Another thing is the grapple hook, which is admittedly fun as all hell to use, but I kinda wish the earlier sections of the game that take place before Drake's Fortune didn't have the grapple hook, because you're left wondering, why doesn't he just use the grapple hook in the other games? You can say it's because it reminds him of Sam, but really? That's kind of a lame excuse if that is the reason. It is fun to use though, and offers up some interesting additions to the sometimes repetitive climbing, while still being nothing new at the same time. Something people were disappointed with were the lack of set pieces, and honestly, it wasn't one of my main complaints. It's definitely disappointing, but I felt like the set pieces we got were fine for the most part. Nothing new, but still somewhat enjoyable. I personally really didn't enjoy Chapter 11's Convoy, which is the main set piece in the game. It was kind of repetitive and annoying, just jumping from car to car. I felt like it was kind of boring. But I enjoyed the vehicle chase just before the convoy. If I had to pick, I'd probably say my favorite set piece was in Chapter 15, the one with the tower collapsing and then the fight with Nadine. Mainly because it actually felt interactive. It didn't just feel like a scripted event, you were actually playing it. Chapter 15 is probably my favorite chapter in the whole game. Chapter 13 is a close second, and well, you know, Chapter 4 of course. There is also driving in the game, meaning you get to drive vehicles of course. It's unnecessary and is kind of forced in, which results in Chapters 10 and 12 feeling out of place and really just being a showcase of the fact that you can drive a vehicle. I did enjoy how you could just drive off in any direction and explore around, which I mentioned earlier. There are a few puzzles in the game which are similar to the previous 3 games, in that they really aren't all that hard, but some are kind of fun. I enjoyed Chapter 12's puzzles the most, mainly due to having to explore around yourself to solve it, but again, really not all that hard. Just one thing quickly though, I absolutely love Nate's jumping animations. I don't know why, but I just couldn't stop jumping in this game. I love the way it looks like his whole body is just being thrown or something. It's really weird, but I just wanted to mention that. Overall, the gameplay is really good, and it's definitely one of the better aspects of the game, which is good, because it's a game, not a movie. Something that I want to mention quickly is how in the previous 3 games you would maybe become bored because you had to replay a certain chapter or part of the games, or at least I have. I chalk that up to replaying the games too many times, or just too often. In Uncharted 4, since getting the Platinum Trophy, yes, I got the Platinum way back in May, I haven't fully replayed one chapter in the whole game, because what I just described is how I feel about the whole game. But this honestly happens so rarely for me in the previous 3. For example, chapters 22 and 23 of Uncharted 2, the monastery part, is probably my favorite part of the whole series, and I never get tired or bored replaying them. I loved how long the chapters were because it made the monastery feel massive, which it was, but that's just something I wanted to mention quickly. Oh, I've been waiting for this. This is a thing I have wanted to talk about for a long time, and is one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video. Uncharted 4's soundtrack, composed by Henry Jackman, is the absolute worst thing about this game. Why? Well, here's why. The soundtrack is terrible, generic, it sounds like trailer music, it sounds like he spent hardly any time on it and just made the same thing he usually makes. It's honestly kind of offensive to Uncharted as a whole, and it brings this game way further down than it should. The previous 3 games all had incredible soundtracks composed by Greg Edmondson, which added wonderfully to the overall experience. The soundtrack isn't a little different. It has nothing to do with Uncharted. If you like this soundtrack, that's fine. I don't understand it all, but I don't really care. The worst thing is that this soundtrack reflects the game so well that it's brought me to the realization that Uncharted 4 doesn't even feel like an Uncharted game. It's not just because of the soundtrack, but it absolutely is a main factor. The soundtrack has maybe 2 decent songs, but other than that, it's an unmemorable pile of garbage that makes Uncharted 4 a bad game, more than anything else in the actual game. It's just a shame that this is seemingly a popularity contest, and that's why so many people love Henry's soundtracks, and are constantly praising it. That's at least how I see it. Greg was and is underappreciated for the previous 3 games, and it sucks that he couldn't come back for Uncharted 4, because I know he would have done an incredible job. It says a lot when the first 37 seconds of Atlantis of the Sands from Uncharted 3 is better than the whole soundtrack of Uncharted 4. That said, we at least still have his incredible music from the previous games to block out Uncharted 4 and its rampant attempts to cut to the chase. If we were just scoring the soundtrack, it'd probably be like a 2 or 3 out of 10. But saying that, there are a few good moments in the soundtrack, believe it or not. For example, this part of the 12 Towers. This part of New Devon. The first 34 seconds of Race to Libertalia are okay. This part of Hidden in Plain Sight. To be honest, I actually kind of like the first 2 minutes of No Escape, especially this part. And this part. And there are probably a few more. I'll admit it, some of these songs are catchy for sure, but catchy or tunes that get stuck in your head doesn't equal good to me. The problem is that it always just goes back to the shitty chorus part of Cut to the Chase, and it's in almost every single action track in the soundtrack. It also sounds the exact same. This is absolutely my least favorite thing about the game, and Cut to the Chase is my least favorite song on the whole soundtrack. It's literally the same thing for 3 minutes. How can anyone like this? Plus, like 80% of the comments on the soundtrack are just people on YouTube mindlessly praising the soundtrack. Again, I don't really care if you like the soundtrack, but some of the comments are just ridiculous. I saw a comment that said something along the lines of, "This sounds like a Marvel movie. I like it." If you think that's a good thing, it isn't, then go watch a Marvel movie and leave Uncharted alone. Or don't, it's too late now anyway. Even the soundtrack for Drake's Fortune is miles better than that of Uncharted 4's. I don't understand why so many people don't like it. It's very underrated compared to the others, but in some aspects, it's up there with the Uncharted 2 and 3 in my opinion. It's also my favourite of the Uncharted soundtracks, to be honest. And from what I've heard of the soundtrack for Golden Abyss, it's already much better than Uncharted 4's. With Henry's songs, what you hear is what you get for the most part, and it just doesn't fit Uncharted in my opinion. Overall though, Uncharted 4's soundtrack is terrible, and I personally hate it. The music in Uncharted has always been one of my favourite aspects and one of the most important aspects of the game. And now in Uncharted 4, it's my least favourite aspect by far. The music could always take part in how I felt about the games overall, and it's definitely one of the reasons I love Uncharted so much. And so with Uncharted 4, I was expecting nothing less than a great soundtrack, and we didn't even get a good one. Even if I thought Uncharted 4 was a good game, the soundtrack would have still ruined it for me, and as a result, Uncharted 4's soundtrack ruined the whole fucking game. And I'm sorry if that sounded like pure hating, but it kind of is, to be honest. Last but not least, I want to quickly talk about Amy Hennig's sudden departure from Naughty Dog. You all would have already heard about this, but I want to give my thoughts on the topic. The way I see it is, Druckley, Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann, wanted the story to be darker, and Amy didn't want that at all. So she was apparently forced out of the company due to creative differences, which could really mean anything. The reason I believe this is true is because they scrapped 8 months work of the game and script almost right after Amy left. To me, that's more than enough evidence. I did at first have faith in Druckley though, due to The Last of Us, and they both worked on the first 2 Uncharted games, so I was sure the game would be great. And it wasn't. The problem is though, if I'm correct in assuming Druckley wanted the game to be darker, then why wasn't it? There is, again, a happy ending. I never cared that there were happy endings at the end of the previous 3 games, because I was never told to expect something darker, for it to have high stakes and more risks, and nothing happened. I didn't need Nate to die or anything, but it felt very anticlimactic in the end. It also felt like you earned the happy ending at the end of those games. In this one, I didn't feel like I earned the characters being happy and having the rest of their lives to look forward to. This is one of my main problems with the game, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the actual game, but more with the way it was marketed as this dark, mature story where something big would happen, and nothing at all. Really all we got was this attempt at a watered down or grounded and more realistic game that feels less like Uncharted and more like The Last of Us, or somewhere in between those two. I'm pretty sure this is the main reason I was left feeling underwhelmed and disappointed. It's such a shame that this was the Uncharted 4 we got. The only reason I wanted a darker Uncharted game was because this is what we were first shown back in 2014 and it looked great, and then they all of a sudden scrapped it. It makes no sense, and thinking about it just confuses me. Again, I'm thinking Druckley wanted the game to be darker, and then once Amy left they changed their minds, which makes no sense at all. Why would they try and push someone out of the company if that is how it went down, if they were just going to, again, have a happy ending? Maybe I'm overreacting, but at first I felt almost lied to with the game we ended up getting, and it seems like everyone is ignoring this or didn't notice it, as I haven't seen anyone talk about it or really even mention it. It's not really worth thinking about now though, as I doubt we'll ever find out what actually happened. It would be great to see what Amy's version of Uncharted 4 would have turned out to be like though. Personally, I just can't come to terms with the fact that Amy left after working on this series for probably more than 10 years, and on the last game in the series she just leaves. I'm sorry, but I refuse to accept that she just left because of creative differences. It just doesn't make sense to me. But to really sum it all up, everything surrounded Uncharted 4 makes an even worse game. Amy leaving and Druckley taking over, the marketing, and the soundtrack all add up to being the worst Uncharted game in the series, and will of course, no doubt, go on to win many Game of the Year awards, because that's just what happens with Naughty Dog, despite most of their games being overrated, especially their last 2. So there you go then. That's how I feel about Uncharted 4, and it feels great to get it off my chest. Since this is technically a review, I assume you're expecting me to give it a score, so I will. Overall, I'd give it a 5 out of 10, which isn't really a positive score, it's just average. But it seemed fair given all of my problems with the game. I would be willing to bump it up to a 6 out of 10 just because it's Uncharted, but that didn't seem fair. I'm giving it this score taking everything into account, and this is a score that I think accommodates how I feel about the game best. Again, if you liked Uncharted 4 or thought it was a masterpiece, that's fine. That's great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I just really didn't. I will admit on my first playthrough, I was being a bit fanboyish and I got carried away with it. I suppose I was just trying to convince myself that the game was incredible when I really didn't believe it. And believe me when I say, no one is more disappointed about the fact I dislike this game. It really annoys me. Like I said at the beginning of the video, Uncharted is probably my favorite video game series, and feeling this way about the last game just makes me sad. But I'm glad I can at least stop lying to myself and admit that I just didn't like the game at all. And that's fine because I don't have to like the game. I hope now that Naughty Dog will just move on from Uncharted forever and go focus on something else. Because I'll admit, The Last of Us was a great game and they did a great job on it, but they really messed up Uncharted 4. In fact, don't even bother with that single player DLC. It won't add anything to the main story, and it won't have us playing as Nate, so what's even the point? I'm honestly not excited for it at all. The main thing with this video is that I hope you can take something away from it that will maybe make you look at the game in a new light, or make you think that just because it's a game by Naughty Dog doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a straight 10 out of 10 or be a masterpiece. If I can make at least one person feel that way, then this video has served its purpose and my job is done. From now on, I'll know better to not get so excited and hyped for a game when it most likely won't live up to the expectation. I also hope I didn't leave anything out or drone on for too long about certain things. Like I said, this is my first ever review, so it won't be perfect. And regardless of whether you agree or disagree with what I've said, I greatly appreciate that you took the time to watch the whole video, as it was probably quite long. Leave a like if you agree with what I've said in the video, and make sure to let me know what you thought of the game in the comments, and I'll make sure to reply. I'd also like to say a big thanks to my friend Ben for helping out with the video and giving me some second opinions on certain topics that I wanted to cover in the video and helping me decide what worked and what didn't. Again, this is my opinion, and I'm expecting some people will still be mad about what I've said, but the fact of the matter is, you liked Uncharted 4 and that's all that matters. It only matters that you liked it, and not some random person on YouTube making a video about it. That kinda renders this video pointless, but it's too late now. So thanks for watching, and I'll maybe see you again.